Welcome to the third webinar of International Group of Eminent Persons for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, which is sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. This is a third webinar of the group IGEP, and this is the occasion to exchange views on the current of affairs of the nuclear disarmament, arms control, and so forth. In particular, we are going to have the third, no, sorry, the 11th, the NPT review conference in this April to May. And this is a great occasion for us to see what's going on in a nuclear disarmament and what we should do to make this event successful. So before we begin, I would like to make a few announcements. First of all, I'm Nobu Akiyama, the director for the Center for Disarmament, Science and Technology at Japan Institute for International Affairs, and I'll be moderating this session. And so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and then write your questions and maybe some constructive comments for any suggestions to make the NPT review conference successful. And also, please note that this webinar will be recorded, and this recorded the webinar will be made available on the Japan Institute of International Affairs website at a later date. So I hope it's okay, and thank you for your understanding. Now, first of all, I would like to invite Ambassador Nakamura from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's a Director General of Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Science Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Japan. So, Ambassador Kimitake Nakamura, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Akiyama. I'm Kimi Nakamura. It is my great honor to welcome you all to this third webinar to the International Group of Eminent Persons for World Without Nuclear Weapons, IGEP. This group, IGEP, established by the Japanese government in 2022, serves as a unique platform for distinguished 15 experts from both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states to engage in open, candid discussions. Over the course of the 6 meetings until last year, the IGEP has engaged in in-depth dialogue, and as a culmination of these efforts, compiled a series of recommendations that Dr. Akiyama will outline later. These recommendations reflect the collective wisdom and the determination of the IGEP to advance nuclear disarmament. Today, we are privileged to be joined by 3 IGEP members, as well as Ambassador Hung Viet, the President-designate of the 2026 NPT Review Conference. As we look ahead to the NPT Review Conference this April, today's webinar provides a timely opportunity to deepen our discussions on the challenges that are expected to be addressed at the said conference. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all the state speakers and participants for joining us today. Let us seize this opportunity to share our insights and strengthen our commitment to a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nakamura. Next, I would like to briefly explain some the points or the gist of our discussion at the IGEP. So I would like to ask Secretariat to share the screen, the slide. Right, thank you. Actually, this is today's speaker. As Ambassador Nakamura introduced, the Ambassador Viet, who will be the president of the next NPT review conference, is kindly taking time to join the panel. And also the other panelists are two of my colleagues from IGEP, Manpreet Sethi from India and George Perkovich from the United States, and they are going to give us their take on the of the discussion that we made during the IGEP project. So now this is the title of the report commissioned by IGEP, Stepping Back from a Nuclear Precipice. So that possibly highlights our sense of urgency to tackle the question on the nuclear disarmament, and also the sense of urgency to deal with the risks that we are facing right now. Next slide, please. So we are basically driven by these factors. So our view was, when the project started, was that the risk of nuclear war is higher than at any time in the recent decades, and then probably it's prompted by the escalation of geopolitical tensions and erosion of arms control norms and regimes, and emerging technology risk is rising. And on top of that, regional security environments are further deteriorated. And thirdly, despite of such a trend, we are witnessing the rise of the norms of nuclear disarmament. So Nihon Hidankyo received a Nobel Peace Prize, and that reminds, us the humanitarian consequences of nuclear use, and also the reminder that it is important to uphold the norm of non-use of nuclear weapons. So now, the NPT review conference is only a few months ahead, and then it is important for us to revisit what we have discussed, and then to emphasize a couple of issues that we are discussing. So the following is the sort of a gist of our papers. I think member of the group reaffirmed core principles. One is the adherence to international law, including UN Charter and international humanitarian law. So rule of law should be the basis for everything in international politics, and that is maybe best way to avoid the nuclear catastrophe. And also, we are reminded that every country has shared responsibility for the nuclear disarmament, but at the same time, nuclear armed states should take a leading role. And thirdly, I think what we are witnessing is a loss of the habit of dialogue and also civility in dialogue. So I think we have to recommit ourselves to the culture of dialogue. Fourthly, we are witnessing the technological changes with the rise of the use of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, and that must be taken care of in order to reduce the risk associated with the nuclear weapons. And fifth, the nuclear deterrence, maybe for the time being, it's a necessary measure for some countries to ensure their security, but we should not stop there. And we have to recognize that it's not the final form of security, and we keep on working to move away from a nuclear deterrence. Next slide, please. So then the group identified the three areas of which necessitates the urgent actions. And first of all, it is utmost important thing is to prevent nuclear war. And obviously, every state should make every effort to avoid the military confrontation, and that could eventually lead into nuclear threats. Secondly, in order to do so, the strategic dialogue is important, and dialogue also help to avoid and prevent misperception, miscalculation, which might cause inadvertent escalations. Third, it is important to uphold nuclear test moratorium and ensure the human oversight in the technologies. Fourth, all states should promote restraints and confidence building. And confidence building is essential to avoid, again, unnecessary escalation. The second area is the nuclear arms race and proliferation must be stopped. And so recently we are witnessing the erosion of arms control regime of the two giants, US and Russia, but dialogue should be resumed, and also P5 collectively engage in such a kind of efforts. Secondly, I think in transparency on doctrine, arsenal, and posture should be the basis for any threat reduction and stopping the nuclear arms race. And third, that need to address artificial intelligence risks. Fourth, promote diplomatic efforts in solving proliferation problems such as Iran and the Korean Peninsula. Finally, it is also essential for us to engage in bridging the divide between NPT and the TPNW states. So, what we have to do to make the 2026 NPT Review Conference more constructive, so we identified actions like reaffirm the commitments to the world without nuclear weapons. So, non-use of nuclear weapons should be a kind of foundational sort of a principle that we have to uphold. Then support the entry into force of a CTBT and demonstration and eventually concluding the FMCT. Third, it is important for the purpose of confidence building that every state should submit the detailed national report. In particular, nuclear armed weapon states should do so that everybody can get sort of confidence that we are engaging in a nuclear disarmament. And also, it is important for every state to submit or kind of propose forward-looking action plans, even if the action plans may not be able to agree collectively and by the all states. But despite of that, I think every state should submit or sort of declare what they are going to do toward the next 5 years in order to achieve a goal of world without nuclear weapons. And the another important thing is the education and awareness. So, of course, civil society takes an important role in that part. But at the same time, we also would like to encourage state leaders to be more aware of the importance of a nuclear disarmament. And so that is probably, again, the societal foundation for upholding the nuclear disarmament. And the nuclear weapon-free zone should be respected. And finally, the regime or the review process should be reformed in order to address the gap of the sort of emerging threats and then what we are working in the existing framework or existing modality of the review process. Next slide, please. So, so we, as a group, call for the collective actions in these, take concrete steps, including the ones that I have mentioned. But in principle, we agreed and strongly urge others to agree that Nagasaki should be the last city to suffer the nuclear devastation, and we also encourage the states and other members of international community to reduce the nuclear threats through the bold and cooperative measures. So and also it is our view that our report will help the global community to recommit to the constructive discussion on the disarmament and non-proliferation through the NPT review conference. So that's actually outline of what we have discussed. Then now I ask my colleagues, maybe first Manpreet, can you tell any points that you'd like to emphasize in the paper? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nobu. I think you've done a commendable job of pulling together all of the threads of our IGEP meetings. And I want to start by commending the Prime Minister of Japan to set up this group in 2022 and the subsequent governments to have remained invested in this exercise at a time when hardly any government or leader is talking about a world without nuclear weapons. I remember when we first came for our first meeting to Hiroshima, there were several negative trends that were already visible. And in our first meeting, we just listed them down. And that was perhaps the easiest meeting that we had, where we were just talking about what these negative trends were. Finding the ways of arresting these trends in the subsequent meetings turned out to be far more difficult. But during the 3 years of our deliberations, we saw the situation worsen. So the geopolitical tensions, the growing salience of nuclear weapons, evident in the modernization and expansion of nuclear arsenals across all nuclear armed states, the gradual disappearance of arms control instruments, but the rapid advent of disruptive technologies. Everything was happening at the same time, and we all felt as if the world was moving closer and closer to the precipice. That's the title then that we gave to our final statement. Now, amidst all the negative developments, I think the one that we felt, or at least I definitely felt, most alarmed by was the resurfacing of the use of force in interstate relations. Just to remind you, last year, we faced the unprecedented situation where interstate wars took place in 3 theaters simultaneously. And each of them involved nuclear armed states. So conflicts between nuclear armed states obviously come with the risk of conventional conflict escalating to nuclear use. And therefore, we felt a strong concern to prevent nuclear war. That, as you can see, is the first core area of activity or area of concern that we are flagging in our statement. And Hibakushas have shown us the devastating impact of even one nuclear warhead. And if such an event was to take place today, it would not be a singular use, but a nuclear exchange of some scale. And today's interconnected world, this would be a disaster beyond imagination. So the only way of averting such a possibility is for nations to share the understanding of nuclear risks and take a collective action back from the nuclear precipice. But how do we do this? I think one opportunity will arise in the form of the NPT review conference in a few months from now. Very happy to see the ambassador here. You have a very difficult task, sir, given that we live in a highly geopolitical contested world where nations will be polarized on several issues. But it is equally important, I think, that we make use of this precious opportunity to reaffirm some core principles that are in the common interest of all. So whether a consensus document on the 3 pillars of the NPT emerges or not out of the review conference, I think it would be a success if some core principles are reiterated by the NPT member states. The member states must appreciate that they have an extraordinarily universal treaty in the NPT. Such an instrument would be impossible to rebuild in today's times, and hence there should be a collective desire to hold on to what we have. Now, I already mentioned that amongst the principles that the IGP has flagged, the most important is the first principle that we have there, which is on eschewing the use of force in interstate relations. I think from 1945, this has undergirded our international order. It should have become a part of our DNA in 80 years, but it has resurfaced. And this needs to be quashed because return to use of force will take us back to the law of the jungle and will eventually lead us down the nuclear precipice too, because there are countries that have nuclear weapons today. Amongst the urgent steps that are listed out in the IGEP statement, there are 3 issues that I want to spotlight very briefly. Firstly, and I think Nobu already mentioned that, is fostering communication. We are in a situation today where the adversarial nuclear dyads are just not talking to each other. There are no kinds of dialogues between any of the dyads which is happening today. And this then increases the chances of inadvertent or accidental escalation. Unless we talk, we don't explain our positions to the other side. We don't understand the other side's positions. It's only by talking to each other that nations will be able to address their mutual security concerns, avoid misperceptions that lead to conflict prevention and conflict escalation. So to reduce mistrust, I think communication has to be the key. And by communication, we don't mean documents talking to each other, but leaders rarely sitting across the table, looking eye to eye and explaining things. Secondly, encouraging steps that reduce nuclear salience. The value of the nuclear weapon is very high. So to get to a world without nuclear weapons, we have to first make these weapons valueless. Only then will humans give up something to which they are not attaching value. In this context, I think having legally binding negative security assurances, if we can talk about that at the NPT review conference and get legally binding negative security assurances, that helps the non-nuclear weapon states. So the threat of nuclear proliferation, which seems to be in the air once again, can be handled. And at the same time, for addressing the concerns of the nuclear weapon states, a commitment to no first use would be another way of reducing the value of the nuclear weapons. Both negative security assurances and no first use would constrain the possibilities of the use of the nuclear weapon. And along with reaffirmation of these principles by reaffirmation of the principle of non-use of force by other countries, it would build an interlocking mechanism that would reduce the salience of nuclear weapons. And lastly, I think ensuring the safety and security of nuclear power plants in conflict zones, a concern that has emerged in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Given that there is a growing interest in nuclear energy driven by climate change concerns and commitments to net zero by nations, it becomes imperative that nations avoid military actions that would cause radioactive release by causing harm to a nuclear facility. This is not in anybody's interest. In the case of India and Pakistan, we have a non-attack agreement on each other's civilian nuclear facilities, and this has stood the test of time despite conflicts having taken place. So this is something that could be replicated by others. So to end then, the recommendations in the IGEP document are practical and feasible if the nations come together with the understanding that this is in the common interest of all. It's not prioritizing one interest over the other. There is no India first, US first, Japan first in this picture. And our survival rests on this understanding of the common interest. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Nobu.
Thank you, Manpreet. I would like to echo the last point that Manpreet mentioned. The IGEP is a group of the really the diverse people with a lot of diverse backgrounds, diverse thoughts on the nuclear weapons. But still, in the end, we are able to agree on some sort of a common interest of to aim at the world without nuclear weapons. And so, in a sense, the report is kind of minimum common denominators that it's possibly agreeable by the all states. So I hope our project will be be making some impact on the discussion as well. So next, I'd like to invite George Perkovich, and can you share your thoughts?
Thanks, Nobu, and it's great to see everybody here. I want to thank our hosts and Ambassador Nakamura and others. I thought what Manpreet said was spot on. That she highlighted many important things, and as you did too, Nobu. Since the IGEP group began, the trends, all but one trend, have been in the opposite direction of what we want. Last week, or February 5th, the last U.S.-Russian nuclear arms control agreement lapsed. It's run out. There is no nuclear arms control in this case. The U.S. now alleges that China may have conducted a nuclear test in 2020. It's not clear what the allegation is. There are a lot of doubts about it. But there is a lot of discussion and pressure in the U.S. to resume nuclear testing. So when lots of us were recommending ratifying and entering into force a treaty banning nuclear tests, the U.S. and perhaps Russia and China are at least seeming to be moving in the opposite direction. There are other examples. I don't want to emphasize all of these negative trends, but I just want to endorse what Manpreet said about and what some of the implications of that are, and I'll get to those implications. I do want to say there's one very positive thing, and it's easy to overlook, and that is that during the Ukraine war, I would argue that the taboo against using nuclear weapons has been strengthened. So early in that war, in 2022, you had Russian leaders frequently making allusions to nuclear war. They weren't making threats really, but talking a lot about this could lead to nuclear war and how horrible nuclear war was. And often these were reported to be threats. When you read them carefully, they weren't actually threats, but they were being reported as threats. And one of the things that's happened, I would argue, over the last few years is the world kind of mobilized against the idea of making nuclear threats, to the point where President Putin and Lukashenko in Belarus acknowledged later in moments of crises, including in 2024 when Ukrainian forces took Kursk, an area in Russia. And Lukashenko, who's a close ally of Putin, said, they're trying to provoke Russia to use nuclear weapons because they know if Russia uses nuclear weapons, the whole world will turn against Russia. And so this is a trap. And in other moments, they talked about how being accused of threatening nuclear war was turning people against Russia. And so Putin and others would deny they were making nuclear threats because this was turning people against Russia. That's a positive thing. And so to the extent that we can reinforce the taboo against using nuclear weapons out of the Ukraine war, I think that's something to build on. That goes to Manpreet's super important point about aggression, about preventing war, of avoiding war. That's absolutely must be the top priority. The only way you're going to get a nuclear war is from a conventional war that escalates. And so you have to prevent that initial war. And if we can focus on that while also emphasizing the taboo against using nuclear weapons, you create political pressure on leaders in states that might violate either the law, but also international opinion against aggression and the use of nuclear weapons. This gets to Manpreet's other important point that we in IGEP talked a lot about, which is leaders of the states that are most adversarial now have to engage in regular dialogue at the highest level. And Manpreet rightly pointed out that the key dyads, so Indian, Pakistani leaders don't talk to each other. They don't engage in serious dialogue. President Trump is supposed to go to meet President Xi in Beijing in April. We hope that happens. That should be encouraged. That's an important thing. There's obviously, it's difficult to engage with President Putin as long as the war in Ukraine is going on. I would argue that should still be attempted. But the world needs to demand that the leaders of the states who, if they got into conflict, would be the drivers of potential nuclear war, they have to engage more regularly. And it has to be done at the leadership level. One of the things that's happened in the US, Russia, and China is we get closer and closer to personalist regimes, authoritarian regimes where one leader really determines state policy. So foreign ministries aren't as relevant as they might have been in the past. You have to have the head of state when you're talking about the kind of individuals now governing these countries. And so I think the world and countries like Japan and other very important middle powers have to be asking and demanding of nuclear armed states that their leaders engage directly on these issues. Manpreet, I think, said that very well. The one area that's specifically nuclear that I think we ought to talk more about is in Article 6 of the NPT. All right. So none of the states that have nuclear weapons is willing to talk seriously about nuclear disarmament now. They would say, are you kidding, in this environment? But where the Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty is most clear, it calls for the cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date. You can debate about nuclear disarmament, but it's very clear that arms race has to stop. We have now resumed an arms race. We are on the verge of an arms race. And so I think for the international community, for the members of the NPT to demand of the nuclear weapon states their engagement with each other on how to end the new arms race. That is a demand that should be made to them. And if they can't answer that question in a satisfactory way, we should just keep coming back on that issue. That is a clear obligation under the NPT. It's not debatable like disarmament is, and they need to address that issue. The last thing I would say is related in a way. Nobu, you talked about the reports that states within the NPT are supposed to issue to the conference. And many states do write these reports, but then they're never really discussed and debated. So they write them, but so what? It seems to me that a useful thing of governments and NGOs around the NPT process would be to organize meetings where experts and others come and comment on the reports and request, if not demand, that states send representatives to explain the reports or answer questions about the reports and turn them into something. So we're kind of halfway there when we say they should do the reports, but it's like writing a paper when you're in college. You can write the paper, that's the most important thing, but you'd also like the professor to read it and to learn something from it. And so I think when the governments do these reports, there needs to be discussion and accountability going forward. And I hope that's something we might promote. Let me stop there and thank you again.
Well, thank you, George. You touched upon the importance of, how, probably the norm of non-use was strengthened, contrary to what many people thought. But that's, I think, a really interesting part. And also, I would like to come back later on. Also, about the report, I completely agree with you. I think in order to make states accountable for their commitment that they have made for the NPT obligations, I think the report should be best utilized, and we have to think about the way how to do it as well. And anyway, we are talking the review conference, so review needs kind of the substantive actions, and the report was originally designed to serve this purpose. So I think it is important for us to think about it. Now I would like to invite Ambassador Viet, who is very much courageous in taking this very difficult position under such a difficult circumstances. And that is even just really raw, the highly valued for the international community and great contribution. And I personally really appreciate that, you volunteer to take this important but difficult task. And I'm sure you are now working hard to communicate with all member states. But despite of the expectation of the many people that the conference will be extremely difficult. So now I would like to hear your take, probably some with optimistic tones, and what we can achieve through the review conference, particularly for the purpose of pursuing the world without nuclear weapons. So Ambassador Viet, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nobu-san. I'm not entirely sure I volunteered to be the president of the NPT review conference, but thank you very much for your very encouraging words. Ambassador Nakamura, it's great to see you again. And thank you once again for very kindly inviting me and hosting me during my visit to Tokyo and Hiroshima to attend the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to share some thoughts at this very distinguished panel of the International Group of Eminent Persons. I listened very carefully and really appreciate the work that you have been doing, and in particular the presentations that gave so much clarity by Dr. Manpreet as well as by Dr. Perkovich right now. I cannot agree with you more about the challenges and about how complex the current geopolitical environment is. We are seeing the modernization of nuclear arsenals. We are seeing the quantitative increase of nuclear arsenals, and in particular in a context where there is no more effective guardrails among nuclear weapon states for any kind of limits or strategic talks. At the same time, we are also seeing the integration of emerging technologies in strategic systems, as well as renewed proliferation concerns in many regions that all demand very careful reflection and practical efforts to manage the risk and reverse the very stabilizing trends. And if we look at the doomsday clock in particular, for example, and use that as an indication, we have never been closer to a catastrophe as we are today. Even in the height of the Cold War, we were not as close as we are today to catastrophe. So just to emphasize how dangerous the current context is. And in such a context, I find that the IGEP paper really offers many pragmatic pathways and guidance for the forthcoming NPT review conference, which I truly appreciate. What I particularly want to emphasize is the pragmatism with which you approach this work. Now, we can be as ambitious as we want, but can we be really pragmatic and realistic with our ambition is a different question. And that is exactly the kind of approach that I think we need as we move towards the NPT review conference. So allow me to offer perhaps three reflections. First of all, I think the NPT itself must be placed within the broader international context. You all mentioned that. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. It is so much influenced and affected by the overall geostrategic, geopolitical security environment. And to strengthen the NPT is to reinforce international law, to reinforce multilateralism, dialogue, and cooperation. And conversely, the erosion of multilateral norms also weakens the non-proliferation regime. And at its core, the NPT embodies shared values and purposes. And by preserving these normative foundations, these purposes, these values, we will enable the communication and cooperation even amongst very divergent security perceptions. And in times of divisions that we are in today, this shared framework, and for that matter, the only that is really left for nuclear arms control, becomes even more indispensable. Secondly, there is a profound sense of urgency in stabilizing the security landscape and preserve the political space for solutions, especially those that advance nuclear disarmament. And in this regard, I particularly welcome the IGEP's very special attention to the need to reinvigorate the strategic discussions amongst the P5, and in particular at the highest level possible. And I think that those discussions should focus on many things, but in particular on, I think, what is, again, very pragmatic, is to improve transparency and increase and address the risks that are associated with emerging technologies. Because in the nuclear domain, there is no margin for error. Any mistake, whether they are human error, technical error, or cyber-induced, could lead to catastrophic and irreversible consequences. And thirdly, I believe that we must accelerate progress towards the full implementation of the core political commitments that have been undertaken in previous review cycles, especially those that are related to the disarmament pillar. This is because the legitimacy, the credibility of the treaty really rests on the balanced and faithful implementation of all three pillars. And this requires sustained engagement and trust, in particular, from all states parties. And this will be the overarching goal at the forthcoming review. And perhaps one final thought, and again, I entirely concur with the assessments by both Dr. Manpreet and Dr. Perkovich about the importance of the peaceful settlement of disputes. I guess there has to be the taboo against not only nuclear use, but against the use of force in violation of the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of member states of sovereign states, of member states of the United Nations. So again, placed within that broader context, I think the NPT is both affected by, but also can contribute to strengthening multilateralism and strengthening those norms that we so desperately need these days. I assumed this post as President-designate of the NPT Review Conference, I guess 5 months ago. And since October, I have been conducting a series of broad-ranging consultations. I have conducted 4 regional consultations with the Asia-Pacific countries in Hanoi, Vietnam, with the African countries in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia. I met with the countries of the Middle East and North Africa in Amman, Jordan, and most recently with the GRULAC group in Panama. And also, I went to Vienna. I've been to the capitals of a couple of P5 capitals, and will be in at least all 5 of the P5 capitals, and will continue these consultations. So I've been, in the last few months, been in a listening mode, really to understand the concerns, the interests, the priorities, the expectations of states parties and the broader public, because I believe that this is not a matter or a conference only for the states parties, not only for governments, but it's really the expectations of the constituencies, of the public, of the people, of each of our countries that really matters in this process. Now, I have to say that the outlook, or what I've been hearing, is quite sobering, to put it mildly. Most people are of the view that this is, again, probably one of the most challenging times we are in. The NPT Review Conference will be one of the most challenging that we have ever had. The geopolitical environment is tense. The expectations are cautious. I mean, some have very high expectation that this will kind of change the trajectory of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation efforts. Others are not really expecting much. Some even are telling me that given the current situation, you shouldn't, spend too much efforts working on it. But in my view, the more difficult the situation, the more urgent it is to preserve the unity around the treaty. And it is most important that we have to be able to adopt a consensus-based outcome document. And such a document has to reaffirm our commitments, our collective commitments to the treaty itself, as well as to the various commitments that we have made as a collective during the past review conferences. And stemming from what I think Dr. Manpreet said, I think this is a world first approach that we have to take. We only have this one world, and it's simply too dangerous for us to give up now. I mean, if we're giving it up to, the climate crisis, we are doomed. If we are giving up on the NPT and on our efforts towards disarmament and non-proliferation, we're also doomed equally. So we have to take this not as a challenge, but as an opportunity for us to really preserve this regime and preserve this world we are living in. But this required very careful navigation over several very fundamental questions. Like, how do we reaffirm past commitments in a security landscape that has really changed profoundly, where states perceive and respond to risks in a markedly different way? How do we responsibly address risks that are associated with the emerging technologies that are not yet fully understood, including their implications for strategic stability and safeguards? Or how do we harness the growing potentials of nuclear energy and technology to contribute to sustainable development while ensuring the highest standards of nuclear safety, security, and non-proliferation? And finally, how can we make the review process itself more fluid, more agile, more responsive, more inclusive to states parties? Because successive review conferences have sought to improve the transparency, inclusivity, and continuity between cycles. And I intend to build on those efforts to ensure that this process remains credible and relevant and result-oriented. So I really appreciate this opportunity again to hear your recommendations and also your discussions. And finally, just allow me to conclude by emphasizing how important the work that IGEP is doing, and how I believe you are not only contributing to the review conference, but really shaping and influencing a longer-term revolution, I hope, of global security thinking. I really appreciate the point made about how we have to make the case that deterrence doesn't work, that nuclear weapons really do not have the kind of value that they somehow have garnered for themselves. Only then can we really truly move towards true disarmament. So once again, thank you very much, Nobu-san and organizers, for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to our continued conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Viet. I think your remarks very much profound, but at the same time very constructive and courageous to me. And I'm so much encouraged by your statement. And despite of the challenges that are ahead of us, probably under your guidance, we should be able to achieve something through the NPT review conference, I hope. I got some concrete sort of items that I would like to discuss. So maybe I pitch in a couple of questions to all panelists, including Manpreet, George, and Ambassador Viet. And if you either sort of answer all, but choose selectively pick up the questions that you want to respond. First of all, I think George and Manpreet both mentioned the importance of addressing the sort of the avoiding aggression, avoiding the conventional warfare, because which could eventually lead into the sort of possible nuclear use. So then what are the important issues that we have to think about? For example, the rule of law is now broken and some countries are not really complying with the UN Charter and so forth. Then how are we going to uphold this principle of non-aggression and also non-use? And then also, it seems to me the threshold of use of nuclear weapon is growingly vague. So, I mean, between conventional warfare and nuclear warfare can be kind of intertwined. So this nuclear conventional integration or entanglements becomes kind of a more sort of plausible. Then how can we sort of avoid such a kind of a situation? The second question is, Manpreet, you picked up the safety and security of the nuclear power plants in kind of in war, and I think this is important principle. But at the same time, this could have and has been a kind of divisive agenda in the last the meetings of NPT, and again, I think it is important. But how are we going to collect us sort of the support on this idea? And so, Ambassador Viet, you are talking about the importance of unity of the NPT community, and also I think you're suggesting that consensus-based the collective commitment will be kind of important to keep the NPT review process as important as it ever more. So then how? So do you think that it's kind of should it be? I don't think it shouldn't be a kind of single criteria for the success, but at the same time, I think the bringing all states into sort of a one possible agreeable sort of a outcome will be a really important sort of achievement. So there's some people said, if you want to achieve such a things, you may want to have you may have to water down the contents. And some others says, substantive, outcome is important. Discussion itself is important than kind of just simply having the agreement. And how do you respond to that kind of sort of discussion? So maybe Manpreet, can you start? And of course, you can respond to what make a comments on what Ambassador Viet said as well.
Thank you very much. And yes, I do want to start with what Ambassador Viet said. It was very reassuring, sir, to hear from you. And I'm really glad we've got a very sensible person leading this entire thing who understands, what the challenges are and yet has that inherent desire to use it as an opportunity to go forward. Just a thought on what Nobu had earlier said about national reports. As the IGEP, one of the recommendations is that countries come up with plans of where they are moving. And I was recalling what happened in the nuclear security summits, where countries came with what came to be known as gift baskets, or so perhaps if we were to frame it like that and get these reports more like gift baskets that they can bring to this RevCon and then into the first PrepCom, second PrepCom, and that then becomes a positive commitment trap by making them use these opportunities to showcase what they are doing positively. And this could then snowball, in some form or the other. But that's just a thought, sir, for you to see whether it's practical and can be implemented. Nobu, three very important questions, but very difficult questions that you've raised about how do you get non-acceptability of use of force. I think what we are missing in this entire picture, where we are seeing more and more countries using force because others are doing that, is because we don't see that what we used to remember, we used to call the international community, that the international community will not allow the use of force. But that international community seems to have dissipated, and there is no collective voice which seems to be putting any pressure on countries that are doing this use of force. So wherever we've seen conflict come up, people have used it only to the extent of their national interest and not so much as international peace and security, words which have really gone missing from the discourse for now. So I think bringing that back, even if it has to be done through the civil society at the moment, because nations don't seem to be stepping up, perhaps has to be one way of looking at it. Conventional nuclear entanglement, a huge issue, I think, in today's times. And we are seeing this is coming because countries have different perception of how to practice deterrence and what is risk. So creating risk for some countries seems to be the way of practicing deterrence. And therefore, this entanglement issue is coming in. But if we continuously highlight the risks that come with this entanglement, and in the case of India-Pakistan conflict, I think this was evident to both sides to some extent. That's one way of showcasing this again. And on nuclear safety and nuclear security, yes, you're very right. This became the divisive point in the last RevCon. We couldn't get a statement out, a consensus document out because of this. So therefore, the framing will become very important rather than just pinning it to a country. If we were to talk in generic terms about the need, because this is no longer only Russia, Ukraine. This has become, something that is important for all theaters where conflict might break out. So therefore, putting it in a more generic sense that applies to everyone on nuclear safety and security being topmost, because this harms not just, it harms the nuclear industry as well. So any incident that was to take place will really bring down the public perception about nuclear energy, just as Fukushima did, and it's taken us, more than a decade to get nuclear energy back on the table. So some framing which makes it more generic might be the answer to the question that you raised. But thanks.
Thank you very much. George.
Thanks. So many smart things have been said, and I want to thank Ambassador Viet, whom I've not met, but I was very impressed by everything you said. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your taking on this job. They would never have asked me to take on this job, but there's no way. It's way too hard. So, but you're a young man, so that's good. You give it a go. A couple of thoughts on the question of the final document, and I'm sure, Ambassador, you're getting great advice from lots of people. My sense is that the outside world, people like IGEP, people like me in think tanks, ought to try to give you space by us saying a final document doesn't have to be the measure of the outcome of the review conference, to relieve some of the pressure to have a consensus document, because I think, especially depending what happens with Iran in the next couple of weeks, and if the United States is attacking Iran again and Israel's attacking Iran again, and how that affects parties as they go into the review, you can't control that at all. And I can imagine that can make a consensus document difficult. Also, the chances of some kind of document being agreed, I would think, you've been told this, the chances will improve the shorter the document is. And if it's general principles more, I think you may have a better chance. And yet so many states have a long list of things they want, and their diplomats have been waiting for years to get the list done. And so how you manage that, I think, is an enormous challenge. I want to pick up on the major theme about avoiding aggression, and what Manpreet was saying essentially about what do you do about those who may be aggressive. I think we have to strengthen. Well, let me back up. I observe that deterrence works. Now, we can talk about nuclear deterrence, conventional deterrence, deterrence through political pressure. There's lots of, but there are things that states and international society do that can inhibit actors from doing bad things that they might otherwise want to do. And when the worry is big powers with nuclear weapons, one of the things we have to do is strengthen conventional deterrence, strengthen the cost of the first part of the war. If the worry is that you have conventional war that could escalate to nuclear, well, then you have to have capabilities at the conventional level that make that state say, okay, it's going to be much harder at the beginning of the war, so the chances are greater I'm going to have to use nuclear weapons if I want to try to win. And if I do that, I may get hit in the back. So strengthening conventional deterrence. And you see movement in this direction now in Europe. And I would credit President Trump for having brought some of that about. President Putin did more to bring it about by invading Ukraine. But you see that, and you see that with the government of Japan. You see that in East Asia, a greater kind of balancing of China's growing power. And I think those aren't things normally talked about in non-proliferation circles, but I think they're very important, and that is useful. But there's a flip side which isn't so often talked about, especially when people are talking about deterrence, and that is reassurance. So as you're deterring somebody, how do you reassure them that what you're not trying to do is bring about regime change or encourage people to do the thing that state has said would be the greatest threat to it? And that points to conflict resolution and pushing for conflict resolution, which the international community could do, I would argue, with more energy and mobilization of power in key areas. Or in the South China Sea, where we talk about things one could do to reduce risk, or the operation of naval forces or maritime forces, whether they're navies or coast guards or whatever you want to talk about them, like strengthening norms and demands about behavior that isn't so risky. Those are the kinds of things that don't come into the NPT because it's focused on nuclear weapons, but they get at what would be the driver that could lead to nuclear war and the driver that could lead to nuclear proliferation. A state in East Asia isn't going to acquire nuclear weapons because they're worried about being attacked out of the blue by nuclear weapons. What they're worried about is a certain country or other country committing aggression at a low level that escalates. So that's what we have to focus on mitigating. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, George. Yes, I would like to hear more, but probably, I have the program. So now I'd like to invite Ambassador Viet.
Well, thank you, Nobu. I think the question of how should we define success is the what I call the $1 million question. I mean, it's really hard to get an answer correct. But let me put it this way: I see a successful conference in two aspects: the process aspect as well as the substantive outcome aspect. In terms of the process, I believe that it's extremely important to make sure that we have a process that is efficient, that is transparent, that is inclusive. A process where every delegate leaving the conference can say that, or can feel that I have been part of this discussion, that I have contributed to the discussion, that I have been I know what was going on at the conference. Now, I have been very fortunate to hear and learn from the experience of many diplomats that went before me, including one of the IGEP members, Ambassador Gustavus Lauvinen, my direct predecessor, who so capably ran the 2022 review conference. There were extremely valuable lessons learned from that process. And I intend to work and try to be a bit innovative in the approach. And again, thank you, George, for for stating that I was young. I think I have to thank the lighting in my room for that, but I am ready to take on the challenge. But again, that's on the process aspect. On substance, some, as I mentioned earlier, are quite skeptical and asking me to have a different approach, that there should be some different metrics of success, that they argue, for example, that the NPT is implemented at national level. Another NPT review conference without an outcome document would not kill the NPT itself. The NPT will survive. Now, they are not wrong, but at the same time, we already have 2 consecutive review conferences without any commitment, collective commitment from states parties. That sends a very dangerous signal to the international community that somehow we as states parties are no longer committed to what the NPT stands for. And on the practical side, the 2022 draft outcome document had extremely valuable initiatives and statements about peaceful use, for example, which, because it was not adopted, cannot benefit developing countries. And I heard this from our colleagues in Africa, for example, who told me that if the document was adopted, there were so many things that could have really improved the application of nuclear energy in their respective countries. And so it's both a overall commitment message that we're sending out, but also at the same time very practical initiatives that really can benefit our people. And again, I mentioned that 3rd pillar of peaceful use. So again, my view is that we need to work very hard towards a consensus outcome document, outlining, first of all, and most importantly, our collective commitment to the NPT and the commitments that we have had in previous review conferences. And secondly, I think this outcome document, we will need to, again, I really like how Dr. Manpreet put it, how we frame the issues. Now, framing the issues are probably the most critical. Instead of, naming one situation or selecting to name one situation and somehow forget about other situations, we may risk another failure. But if we frame it in a more principles approach, then I think we might be able to agree on something, because they are applicable not only to that one particular situation, but they may be applicable to other that are going on, but also future situations that may happen. We talked about the use of force. I mean, now we talk only about Ukraine and Iran, Gaza, but I mean, it's not the first time that we are seeing the use of force against the violation, against the sovereignty or territorial integrity of states. I mean, we saw that in Iraq, we saw it in Yugoslavia. I mean, we saw it in my own country, in Vietnam, many, many years ago, where, mind you, the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons was discussed, and fortunately was not decided to be used, but was discussed. So it was an option. So again, I think it's extremely important that we have a consensus outcome document. And again, it's important how we frame these issues. And this is exactly what I am conveying to states parties, and hope that everyone can get on board on that same approach, so that we can come out with with a strong commitment, and also, put it in the framework of the next 5 years, not, a futuristic vision, but really something that is really pragmatic, practical for the next 5 years to be implemented.
Thank you very much. Now I see some questions from the audience, and maybe in next 20 minutes I would like to ask the panelists to respond. So first of all, I think in terms of framing, there is a question from the Bangladesh. It's about the relationship between the concept of human security and the disarmament. But at the same time, the question how the disarmament and SDGs are intertwined, I mean, related or somewhat, how to avoid the trap of a sort of a zero-sum game between the objectives. Do you think that would be kind of appropriate? I mean, do you think that would be possible? And then how do you think that should be addressed in the NPT review conference? I think that question goes to Ambassador Viet, I think.
I'm not really an expert on human security. Maybe Japan is more appropriate to answer that. But I think, when it comes to disarmament and sustainable development, one of the issues that we will need to address in the NPT review conference context is that third pillar, how peaceful use of nuclear energy, the application of nuclear technology can serve the sustainable development of states. Now, this is a strong desire from developing countries that they can get better access, that they can get more support, that they can get transfer of technology, and be able to make better use of nuclear technology. Now that's a real life kind of needs. But as we have seen more recently at the United Nations, the mentioning of sustainable development, the mentioning of SDGs, of gender, of climate, have been rejected by a couple of countries, and rejected quite ferociously. So this is, again, another issue that I will need to try and frame and address within the framework of the review conference and the outcome document. But I guess overall, we are seeing continued and record-breaking increase in military spending in general over the past decade or so, breaking all ceilings. And if we could only have a minute proportion of that invested in sustainable development and the implementation of the SDGs, we would be able to achieve the SDGs within the time frame. So I guess these are much bigger question than the NPT itself, but perhaps just a couple of thoughts there.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's a kind of challenging question, but I think you elaborate really well about kind of how to address all kind of different issues in the context of the disarmament. But I know that's difficult question. So another question is about disarmament education. I would like to ask Manpreet. Of course, we talked a lot about the importance of education to the public, the youth, and as well as how to engage the political leaders in the sort of increasing the awareness. So we also talked about how the G7 summit held in Hiroshima was really effective in reaching out to the top leaders of the states. So what do you think? How the NPT review conference should address this question? And also we made a kind of reaffirmation Nagasaki should be the last city to suffer from nuclear weapons. So any role of such a outreach and the Manpreet?
Thank you very much, Nobu. And I was just asking for the floor on the previous question. The thought that came to me on the linkage between disarmament and SDGs, while not calling it SDGs because it's become a bad word for some countries, but we've had the example of megatons to megawatts. Where the disarmament of the nuclear weapons led to the production of nuclear electricity. So perhaps, bringing up that example as a positive example where countries could commit to some reduction of their nuclear arsenal and providing for that fuel to become available for nuclear energy could be a thought that could be played around with. I mean, we've had one such example and perhaps it could be multiplied. But Nobu, to the question about education and awareness of these issues, I think we've been talking about it for the longest time, unless for such a long period of time, the nuclear issue had fallen off people's thoughts and minds, and it's come back with a vengeance today. And the only way of getting everyone to understand the risks is through that awareness, through campaigns, through education. We spoke in our IGP meetings about the role of Hibakshas in this, about the need for people to visit Hiroshima. And if people can't come to Hiroshima, can we have mobile exhibitions of Hiroshima traveling to different parts of the world, creating that awareness? Movies like A House of Dynamite, which has come out now, again, is showcasing the risks that come with nuclear weapons, the decision-making dilemmas, what will happen the day after. And the leaders, I think, need to see these kinds of movies where you connect with the human characters and are able to internalize that effect much more than abstract presentations being made on, the numbers of people that will vaporize. That looks so abstract and distant compared to when you're able to relate to a character in a movie. So therefore, the need for these kinds of things. I'm glad Ambassador Viet also mentioned the doomsday clock. Again, one graphic representation of the risks. Though I think President Trump did say that he had his own doomsday clock, which had infinite seconds, so he didn't bother about 85 seconds being something which is so alarming. But instruments like this appeal to public mind and make an impact. At least it provokes them into thinking and talking about these issues much more. And I think that's the kind of awareness and education that we are looking for.
Well, thank you very much. And George, there's a question about deterrence. So we talked about a lot of nuclear deterrence, but the question is, can conventional weapons deter the nuclear weapons? And that's particularly relevant for non-nuclear weapon states under nuclear shadow. So after the invasion in Ukraine, many states thought about possible conflicts under the nuclear shadow. So even though nuclear weapons won't be used, but under the influence of nuclear weapons, then nuclear armed states can control the escalate, in the conflict as well. So I'd like to sort of ask you, your take on what would be sort of the effective way to prevent such a kind of nuclear shadow effects.
Yeah. I think the main idea is not that conventional weapons would deter the use of nuclear weapons. It's you need conventional capability to deter conventional war, which is the way the war starts. It could go nuclear. In other words, Ukraine couldn't have had nuclear weapons in 1994. They passed them back to the Soviet Union, but there really wasn't an option, and we can go into that in some detail. But in the intervening years, the question was, could Ukraine and its friends have done more to strengthen Ukraine's conventional capabilities so the Russian leadership didn't think it would be easy to go into Ukraine? Now, it turned out Ukraine was much better equipped and motivated than the Russians thought. And we're now, next week, will begin year 5 of the war, which is not what Putin had in mind. It's still been nuclear. Russia hasn't used nuclear weapons. Russia has suffered more than 1 million casualties. Russia has lost in so many ways. Again, despite having 4,000 nuclear weapons and Ukraine having none, and Ukraine not being a member of NATO. So this kind of demonstrates the capacity of conventional capabilities to stop or slow an aggression. And that's the point, is not that it's deterring nuclear use, you're deterring the conventional aggression in the first place.
All right, thank you very much. We have some other, actually, the members of IGEP on the floor. So I wonder if somebody could sort of make an intervention. Tanya,
Nobu,
Tanya?
I've lost sound.
Yeah. Right. I can hear you. Please.
Completely lost the sound. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Oh, you can hear me. Well,
Yeah.
I'll just talk into a vacuum. I'm glad you can hear me. I just wanted to say thank you all for I've really enjoyed our discussion. I've been taking the back seat from a lot of these issues for the past 6 months while I've been working on a completely separate project. And that break has really allowed me to sort of sit back and really absorb, process a lot of what has been going on in the world. And it's given me, I suppose, some fresh eyes to really help try and make sense of a lot of the strategic developments and a lot of what really is a really major attack really on international community. It's interesting, and I think a lot of today's discussion has really been helpful. And I really, as I've looked back at our IGEP statement that we made, our last one last year, I still see that it remains extremely relevant. And a lot of the steps that we outlined were very practical. And I would continue to really look to that statement as one that has come out of a lot of discussions among experts, of a very diverse range of experts too. And so I still uphold it. But I would say a couple of things that I would probably add to that statement. And one of them is that despite what is going on in the world, we do need to continue to stress the importance of unilateral restraint as a confidence building measure and trust building measure. And I see some stepping back from that, which is causing some uncertainty around global leadership and around the future of arms control and non-proliferation. So we need states to use unilateral measures as an accountability and transparency measure. And we can't step away from that. It's absolutely critical. Yes, it's really important that we focus on preventing nuclear war and on stopping arms racing. Absolutely, those should be our focus. And in order to do that, we need to rebuild arms control. And I think one of the things I really hope comes out of the RevCon is the commitment to rebuild the arms control architecture and update it for the environment that we are now living in. But as well as that, I hope that just isn't used to sort of pass off responsibilities and commitments that states have independently outside of their joint commitments, to take unilateral measures that help promote transparency, that help promote disarmament, and that help prevent proliferation. I would hopefully look to, if I was going to rewrite the IGEP statement now, I would put some things in there about the importance of unilateral measures and unilateral restraint, and how that remains key, even in a very uncertain, unstable world, and one in which states are really looking very carefully what each other is doing. And I think one of the big steps should be transparency around testing all types of strategic weapons and capabilities. There must be transparency. And I really hope that we could get some very clear statements on that out of the review conference. But thank you all. I'm sorry, I can't hear anything. But I did hear the seminar. I heard all the statements and discussion, and I thought it's been excellent, and I've been glad to engage. And I apologise for stepping back from being part of the panel, because I have actually been in observing mode for a while, and I'm just in catch-up mode as well, because I've been so busy with other things. But from next month, I'll be totally recommitting to NPT-related issues. And I would like to wish Ambassador Viet the best of luck for a successful meeting. And I really appreciate and admire your very, I would say, positive approach to at least trying to come up with a consensus statement. And I agree with you, it is important to try to do that consensus document. So yes, like you, I really believe that the NPT is pivotal, and it's so critical to global security. It actually is a strategic treaty. It's important that states understand that. So thank you. Back to you, Nobu. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to say something. I hope I made some sense.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tanya. So I just thought that it's time to finish. And so before concluding, maybe I will ask if Ambassador Nakamura has anything to say. But before asking Ambassador Nakamura to take the floor, I'd like to say a few words. My appreciation goes to the three excellent panelists, and I think this meeting, this discussions, extremely helpful for us to understand where we are in terms of what kind of risk we are facing in the nuclear front. At the same time, Ambassador Viet give us an encouragement to not to give up the NPT review process, and also I think confidence that I'm sure your leadership is going to help the international community to work together, and also reminded us of the importance of sort of a collective engagement to the common objective, the common cause of a world without nuclear weapons. And I really hope that my government and other governments will give their full support to your leadership as well. So Ambassador Nakamura, do you have any few words to conclude the session?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Akiyama. And I truly appreciate Ambassador Viet's participants in the middle of the hectic days. Also, I'm so glad to see you again, Ms. Ogilvy White. Also, Dr. Sethi, thank you for taking part of the discussion. I truly enjoyed the candid discussions. I hopefully meet some of you in New York or in the Revit conference the time frame. Thank you very much, everyone, to join us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, George, Manpreet, and Ambassador Viet and Tanya, Ambassador Nakamura. So this is the end of the webinar, and I'd like to remind that the review conference will take place from 27th April to 22nd May. And so the IGEP is going to organize the side event at the review conference, sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. That will be held on the 27th of April. And the detail will be announced, and please stay tuned. So thank you very much. Thank you for all for the participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.